It was the scream that startled me, that guttural sound I'd never heard before. I was sitting on the staircase with his bedroom door slightly open, waiting. 15 minutes earlier, I had snuck into the bathroom and done what needed to be done. The industrial adhesive was still in my pocket when I heard that howl of pain. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine was served hot and sticky. And yes, I smiled when I heard that scream. My name is Ryan. I'm 19 now. I'm sitting in this empty park because sometimes I need air, space, distance from everything and everyone. I spent the last 2 years in a juvenile rehabilitation center for something many would consider monstrous, a premeditated assault with intent to cause permanent damage, as the judge described it. But nobody knew what happened between the four walls of that house. Nobody asked why a 16-year-old boy would do something so extreme to his own grandfather. I'm not here to justify myself, nor to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I need to tell this story, because there are truths that need to be heard, even if in whispers, even if between the lines. My grandfather Frank was respected in the community, a man of traditional values, as everyone said, a patriarch, the pillar of the family. Nobody would ever suspect what happened when we were alone, what began when I was just 11 years old and only ended when I made a decision that would change my life forever. But before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you're really paying attention to me, if you can feel the weight of the words I'm about to share, help me not to be just another forgotten statistic. Like this video now, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any accounts like mine, and comment where you're watching from. It seems simple, but for someone like me, knowing that people are listening, that they're really listening, means more than you can imagine. And believe me, what I'm about to tell you will change the way you look at those smiles and family photos, because behind every smile, there might be a story no one can imagine. So, are you with me? Are you ready to hear what nobody wanted to listen to for years? My childhood began like any normal kid's. I lived with my parents in a simple but cozy house in the suburbs. My dad, Charles, worked as a truck driver and spent weeks on the road. My mom, Diana, did what she could to keep everything in order with her job as a house cleaner. We didn't have much, but we were happy in our own way. Everything changed when my mom was in a car accident when I was 10. She survived, but was left with injuries that prevented her from working for a long period. Bills began to pile up, and my dad had to take on more hauls, becoming even more absent. It was at this point that my paternal grandfather, Frank, offered help. "Let the boy stay with me while you recover financially," he suggested. My parents saw it as a blessing. Frank had been a widower for 5 years, had a large, comfortable house, and always seemed to really like me. He was the grandfather who brought presents on birthdays, who told interesting stories, who had that aura of wisdom that grandfathers usually have. At first, it was even fun. His house had a huge backyard with trees to climb, a bigger TV than ours, and he always had candy hidden in strategic places around the house. "Our little secret," he'd say about the chocolates he gave me at odd hours. I didn't know that would be the first of many phrases about secrets I'd hear in the following years. The first few months were peaceful. I went to school, came back, did homework, and my grandfather treated me well. On weekends, my parents would come to visit. My mom was still recovering, using crutches with a constant expression of pain on her face. My dad looked increasingly tired, with deep dark circles under his eyes. I understood they were struggling and didn't want to be an additional problem. "Is everything okay here with Grandpa?" my mom always asked. "Everything's great," I'd answer. And I really believed it at the beginning. It was after turning 11 that I began to notice subtle changes in my grandfather's behavior. First were the long, strange looks that made me uncomfortable. Then the way he started, accidentally, walking into the bathroom when I was showering. "Old door doesn't close right," he'd justify, but he'd take his time leaving. Soon came the seemingly innocent touches that lasted too long, a hand on my shoulder that slid down my back, a hug that squeezed me in a different way, the way he sat too close to me on the couch when we watched TV. I started having trouble sleeping. I developed the habit of pushing the dresser against my bedroom door before going to bed. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear the sound of the doorknob turning gently. My heart would race, and I'd pretend to be deeply asleep, praying the dresser would be heavy enough. But it wasn't. One night, he managed to push the door with enough force to move the furniture. He entered my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I pretended to sleep with my heart nearly bursting out of my chest. He just sat there watching for what seemed like forever. Then he whispered, "I know you're awake, Ryan. You don't need to be afraid of Grandpa." That's when the real nightmare began. The nightmare I carry in silence to this day. I won't go into detail about what happened. Some things are so dark that even after years I can't name them. I just know I cried silently until dawn. The next day, I tried to call my mom, but my grandfather was always nearby, listening to every word. "I miss you," was all I managed to say, hoping she would notice something in my voice, but she was busy with her own pain. "We'll be together again soon, son. Hang in there a little longer." Hanging in there is what I did for years. At school, my performance plummeted, from an exemplary student to a troubled one in a matter of months. My teachers noticed, of course. One of them, Mrs. Harrison, even called me for a talk. "Ryan, is something going on? You can tell me." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was greater because my grandfather had been very clear. "If you tell anyone, I'll say you're lying to get attention." Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the respected grandfather, or a troubled boy? Besides, my family depended on his help. My mom was still in treatment. My dad was working double to pay the medical debts. I was just a kid, but I understood enough to know I couldn't cause more problems. So I shut down, isolated myself, created a shell. On visiting days, I smiled for my parents, said everything was fine, that I was just tired from school. They noticed something was wrong, but attributed it to the stress of the move, the homesickness. "You'll be back home soon," they always said, but that soon turned into years. By 13, I had transformed into another person. The cheerful, curious boy had become a quiet, skittish teenager with perpetually downcast eyes. I started self-harming, small cuts hidden under long sleeves, physical pain that somehow briefly relieved the pain in my soul. It was at this time that I discovered my grandfather's journal, a black-covered notebook hidden at the bottom of his sock drawer. I read pages that confirmed my worst nightmare. I wasn't the first. There were others before me, distant cousins, neighbors, even a grandnephew, all young boys who, for some reason, had spent periods in that house. It was also when I discovered about the condoms. My grandfather, always careful, used them not out of concern for me, but to avoid leaving evidence. I read in his journal how he prided himself on his prudence, on how it had saved him from trouble in the past. At this point, something began to change inside me. It wasn't just fear and shame anymore. It was a cold, calculating, growing anger. An anger that kept me awake at night, planning. An anger that gave me strength to survive one more day. An anger that would eventually transform into action. The years between 13 and 15 became a blur of pain, fear, and silent rage. The routine established by my grandfather was calculatedly perfect to hide what was happening from the outside world. We were just a dedicated grandfather and his troubled teenage grandson. "Ryan is a difficult boy," he'd tell the neighbors when I refused to leave my room to interact with visitors. "Teenagers, you know how it is, but I'm doing my best." And everyone believed him. Why wouldn't they? Frank Mitchell, 68, ex-military, widower, dedicating his retirement years to helping family. A man who went to church on Sundays, who participated in community events, who donated to charities, the perfect exemplary citizen. Meanwhile, inside that house, I lived in a constant state of alert. I learned to recognize the signs when he drank a little more during dinner, when he watched certain TV programs with that specific look, when he made seemingly innocent comments about how I was growing strong. Each of these signs was a harbinger of what would come later, when the lights went out. I developed rituals to protect myself, even knowing they were useless. I slept fully clothed with multiple layers, even in the heat. I placed noisy objects near the door to serve as an alarm. I would sometimes spend entire nights sitting in the corner of the room back against the wall, fighting sleep. At school, my behavior deteriorated more and more. Fights, aggressive responses to teachers, poor grades. I was called problematic, rebellious, ill-mannered. Nobody suspected that this was the only way I had found to cry for help. A new teacher, Mrs. Martinez, was the only one who seemed to see beyond the facade. After I exploded in fury during her class over something trivial, she didn't send me to the principal's office as others would have. Instead, she asked me to stay after class. "Ryan, I'm going to ask once, and I want you to be honest," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "Is someone hurting you?" I felt my entire body tremble. The words got stuck in my throat. It was the opportunity I had been waiting for, but the fear was paralyzing. What if nobody believed me? What if my family was harmed? What if— "No," I answered, looking away. "Nobody's hurting me." She didn't insist, but handed me a piece of paper with a phone number. "It's a helpline. You can call anytime. You don't have to give your name if you don't want to." I kept that paper for weeks, looking at it every night, imagining what would happen if I called, but I never had the courage. At 15, I received the news that my mom was finally better and that my dad had secured a more stable job. They were ready to take me back home. It should have been the happiest day of my life. "We'll pick you up next weekend," my dad said on the phone. "We've got your room ready. Your mom can't talk about anything else." For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. 1 week. I just needed to hold on for 1 more week, and then I would be free. Free from that house, that room, those hands. My grandfather heard the conversation. I saw his face change when he understood what was happening. That gentle smile he showed the world transformed into something cold and calculating when we were alone. "Looks like our time together is ending, Ryan," he said with terrifying calm. "We should make the most of it, don't you think?" The next days were the worst. As if he knew his power over me had an expiration date, Frank intensified everything. The fear I felt before transformed into pure terror. I completely stopped sleeping. I ate only when absolutely necessary. I was living in a constant state of dissociation, as if observing my own life from outside my body. 3 days before my parents were supposed to pick me up, he crossed a line that even he hadn't crossed before. The pain was so intense, so dehumanizing, that something inside me simply broke. I didn't cry, didn't scream. It was as if a part of me died in that moment, and another part, cold, calculating, determined, was born in its place. That night, when I was finally alone, I took a shower that lasted hours. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, as if I could clean not just my body, but the memory, the sensation of his hands, his smell. And it was during that shower that I saw again the box of condoms in the bathroom cabinet, that box he kept as a precaution. And then, like a flash, the idea emerged. My grandfather was methodical in his habits, predictable. I knew exactly when and how he would act. I knew he would be drinking his favorite whiskey that night, as he did every evening. I knew he would call me to talk around 10 p.m. I knew which condoms he would use. Always the same ones, always from the same place. What he didn't know is that I had learned to be patient, to plan, to wait for the right moment. The next morning I left early for school, but instead of going to class, I went to the hardware store in the neighboring district. The salesman looked at me suspiciously when I asked for the strongest industrial adhesive they had. "School project," I explained, forcing a smile. He didn't question further. I returned home before my grandfather got back from the senior center, where he spent his mornings. I took the small tube of glue from my pocket and went straight to the bathroom. With trembling hands, I took one of the condoms from the box. Carefully, I applied a thin layer of glue to the inside. Then I put it back in the box, exactly as it was before. I did the same with 2 more to be sure. Then I waited. The hours dragged on. Each minute seemed like an eternity. When night finally came, I pretended to be tired and went to my room early. I heard the familiar sounds of the house, the TV tuned to the evening news, the clinking of ice in the whiskey glass, the heavy footsteps down the hallway. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. I didn't know exactly what would happen. I hadn't planned beyond that moment. I just knew something needed to change, and I would be the agent of that change. At 10:03 p.m., I heard his footsteps approaching my room. My bedroom door opened slowly, as on so many other nights. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I felt his weight sink the mattress when he sat on the edge of the bed. The smell of whiskey was strong. "Ryan," he whispered, "I know you're awake. Let's talk in my room. I have something special for our second-to-last day together." I opened my eyes slowly, trying to appear sleepy and scared, as always, but something had changed in me. The fear was still there, of course, but now there was something stronger dominating. Anticipation. "I'm tired, Grandpa," I murmured. "Come," he insisted, his gentle tone contrasting with the firm grip on my arm. "Just for a little while. I promise it'll be quick today." I got up, deliberately stumbling, buying time. My plan until then had simply been to apply the glue and wait for something to happen. But now, realizing we were about to enter his bedroom, I had a better idea. A refinement of the original plan. "Can I use the bathroom first?" I asked in a small voice, the same voice he was used to hearing in moments of submission. "Sure," he replied, that fake benevolent smile on his face. "I'll wait for you inside." In the bathroom, I acted quickly. I opened the condom box and checked again the 3 I had prepared. They were exactly where I left them. But now, instead of leaving them for him to choose randomly, I took all 3 and put them in my pajama pocket. Then I took 3 normal condoms and spread them on top of the others in the box so it would look like nothing had been touched, but ensuring he would pick one of the manipulated ones. Then I washed my face with cold water, trying to calm my accelerated breathing. In the mirror, I saw a face I barely recognized. Sunken eyes with deep dark circles from so much secret crying, prominent cheekbones from weight loss in recent months, dry and cracked lips from being bitten so much to stifle screams. "It ends today," I whispered to my reflection. I left the bathroom and walked slowly down the hallway. His bedroom door was ajar, a streak of yellow light escaping into the dark corridor. I stopped for a moment, my heart beating so loudly I could feel it in my ears. Part of me wanted to flee, run out the front door and never look back. But where would I go? And what would happen to the next boy who crossed my grandfather's path? No, it had to be today. It had to be now. I gently pushed the door and entered. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, already shirtless, the whiskey glass almost empty on the nightstand. "Took you a while?" he commented, patting the space beside him. "Come sit here." I obeyed, keeping my eyes down, as I always did. The ritual was always the same. First, he would start with a seemingly normal conversation about school, about the day, as if he were really interested in my life, as if this were a normal relationship between grandfather and grandson. "Your parents arrive the day after tomorrow," he commented, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Are you going to miss Grandpa?" I swallowed hard. "I guess so." "That doesn't sound very convincing," he laughed, but there was tension in his voice. "After everything I've done for you." His hands began to move, and I forced myself not to react, not to pull away, as my body was begging me to do. I needed everything to seem normal. I needed him to follow exactly his usual routine. After a few minutes of this torment, he stood up and went to the dresser drawer. As I predicted, the critical moment had arrived. I sat up straighter on the bed, watching attentively as he opened the box and chose one. For a terrible moment, I thought he would pick one of the normal ones, but then his hand stopped exactly over one of the ones I had prepared. "Why don't you get ready while I go to the bathroom?" he suggested, taking the condom and walking toward the bathroom attached to the bedroom. As soon as the bathroom door closed, I got up silently. The initial plan was simply to wait for the effects of the glue, but suddenly I was afraid something would go wrong. What if the glue wasn't strong enough? What if he noticed before using it? I silently ran to the bedroom door, grabbed my backpack that was in the hallway, and took out the tube of glue. I went back and hid it under the pillow. A plan B in case the first one failed. I sat back on the bed, trying to appear exactly as I was when he left. I heard the sound of water running in the sink. He was washing his hands, as he always did. He would be back soon. The seconds dragged on. Each beat of my heart felt like a hammer. Each breath was conscious, forced. And then, finally, it happened. The scream came first, a high-pitched, almost inhuman sound, then a dull thud, as if something heavy had fallen. "What the fuck is this?" I heard him roar from the bathroom. More noises, water running forcefully. Another scream, this time of pain. "Ryan! Ryan!" The bathroom door opened violently. My grandfather was there, his face contorted in an expression that mixed pain and fury. A towel wrapped around his waist, stained with blood. "What did you do?" he roared, advancing in my direction. "What did you do, you demon child?" I should have been terrified. I should have begged for forgiveness, tried to flee. But instead, I felt a strange calm envelop me, as if I were observing the scene from outside my body. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, my voice strangely firm. He advanced and grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me violently. "You messed with my condoms. It was you, wasn't it?" His face was so close I could smell his whiskey breath. His hand squeezed my shoulders hard enough to leave marks, but I didn't feel fear. Not at that moment. "Let me go," I said calmly, "or I'll scream so loud the neighbors will hear." He released me as if he'd been burned, taking a step back. The fury on his face gave way to disbelief. You wouldn't do that." "I would," I answered, standing up from the bed. "And I'd tell everything about all the nights, about all the other boys in your journal." His eyes widened. I read everything," I interrupted. "I know about all of them. I know what you did. And now you're bleeding." He looked at the stained towel and then at me, the reality of his situation finally settling in. It wasn't just the physical pain or the blood that worried him, it was the fact that he would need medical help. And how would he explain that kind of injury? You will regret this," he muttered, his voice now weak. "Your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe?" "Maybe you," I answered honestly. "Or maybe the pages of your journal that I photographed with the school phone and sent to my email." It was a lie. I hadn't photographed anything, but he didn't know that. The blood drained from his face. "You didn't do that." "Tomorrow my parents are coming to pick me up," I continued, feeling a strength growing inside me with each word. "I'm leaving here, and you will never touch me with a finger again. Never again." He staggered back until he was leaning against the wall. The physical pain seemed to be getting worse. "I need to go to the hospital," he muttered. "Then go," I replied, walking toward the door. "And good luck explaining what happened." I left the room and went straight to mine, locking the door behind me. I pushed the dresser against it as I did every night, and sat on the bed, trembling uncontrollably. What happened next was a confusing sequence of events. I heard him moving down the hallway, moaning in pain, the front door opening and closing, his car starting and leaving at high speed. I thought I was finally safe, that he had gone to the hospital, and that I would have peace at least until the next morning. I was wrong. 3 hours later, the front door opened again. Heavy footsteps down the hallway, a thud on my bedroom door. "Open this door," his voice thundered. There was no longer the tone of pain, just pure fury. I curled up on the bed, my heart racing. "Go away or I'll call the police," I shouted, my voice trembling, betraying my fear. "You will pay for this," he shouted, punching the door. "Open up or I'll break it down." The doorknob turned frantically. The door shook with each blow. The dresser began to move. In panic, I grabbed my cell phone. I had no credit to call, but I could simulate a call. "I've got the police on the line," I shouted. "They're hearing everything!" For a moment, the blows stopped. Silence. I thought it had worked. Then, a crash. The door exploded inward, the dresser toppling sideways. And there he was in the doorway, his face contorted in pure hatred, a hammer in his hand. "You ruined everything," he growled, advancing. What happened next was pure survival instinct. He lunged forward with the hammer raised. I threw myself to the side, rolling from the bed to the floor. The hammer hit the pillow where my head had been a second before. He turned to me, raising the hammer again. I backed up until I hit the wall, no way out. "Your father said you were a good boy." He spat the words. "That I'd be proud to have you here. And look what you did." What I did? The words escaped my mouth before I could contain them. Years of silent rage finally finding an outlet. "And what did you do all those nights? All those years?" He hesitated for a moment, surprised by my outburst. It was enough. I dove to the side, passing under his arm and running for the door. He turned quickly, grabbing my t-shirt and pulling me back forcefully. I fell to the floor, hitting my head against the corner of the fallen dresser. The pain was immediate, followed by a warm wetness running down my temple. "I'm going to teach you what happens to ungrateful boys," he hissed, dragging me across the floor. I fought, kicked, scratched, but he was much stronger. Years of military work had given him strength that age hadn't completely diminished. With a sudden movement, he lifted me up and threw me against the wall. The impact expelled all the air from my lungs. It was then that I saw the tube of industrial adhesive that had fallen from the pillow during the struggle. It was a few inches from my hand. As he approached again with the hammer raised, I extended my arm and grabbed the tube. "Playtime's over," he said, his voice strangely calm. "Now you're going to learn to—" I didn't let him finish. With a quick motion, I uncapped the tube and launched the contents directly at his face when he leaned over me. The scream that followed was worse than anything I had ever heard. He dropped the hammer and brought his hands to his eyes, staggering backward. The glue hit mainly his forehead and one of his eyes. He screamed unintelligible words of pain and fury. I took the opportunity and ran out of the room, down the hallway, stumbling in the darkness. I managed to reach the kitchen, frantically searching for the phone. I needed to call someone, anyone. But before I could reach the device, I felt a violent impact on my back. He had followed me, blind in one eye, and thrown some object. Later I discovered it was a crystal paperweight from the hallway table. I fell onto the kitchen table, knocking off plates and cutlery that were there. One of the kitchen knives slid and stopped near my hand. My grandfather staggered into the kitchen, one hand still covering the affected eye, the other extended in front of him, feeling his way. "I'm going to kill you," he growled. "I'm going to kill you and say you went crazy, that you tried to attack me and I defended myself." He continued advancing, each step calculated despite his compromised vision. I backed up until I felt the cold kitchen wall against my back. There was nowhere to go. That's when my hand found the fallen knife on the floor. "Stay away from me," I warned, my voice trembling. He laughed, a guttural and sinister sound. "Or what? You'll stab me? You don't have the guts." "Please," I begged one last time. "Just let me leave." "You're not going anywhere," he replied, advancing one more step. What happened next remains in my memory as a sequence of disconnected flashes. He lunged. I raised the knife in a purely defensive gesture. He threw himself at me. There was resistance, then a smooth slide, a wet sound, heat on my hands, and then silence. My grandfather stared at me with a surprised expression, his mouth open in a perfect O. He lowered his gaze to his own abdomen, where the knife had penetrated to the handle. "You," he murmured, his voice now just a whisper. "You really—" His legs gave way and he fell to his knees, still looking at me with that incredulous expression. Then he toppled to the side, the knife still stuck in his abdomen. I was paralyzed, watching the red stain spread rapidly across his shirt. My hands were shaking violently, covered in blood. His blood. The world around me seemed to have slowed down, each second stretching infinitely. I don't know how long I stood there motionless, just watching. It could have been a minute, it could have been an hour. At some point, my brain finally processed what had happened, and I began to act mechanically. I picked up the phone and dialed 911. When they answered, my voice came out strangely calm. "I need help. I just stabbed my grandfather. He tried to kill me." The operator asked several questions, but I answered all of them with the same calm and clarity. I provided the address, hung up. Then I sat on the kitchen floor at a safe distance from the body and waited. The police arrived first, followed by the ambulance. I was taken to the police station while paramedics tried to revive my grandfather. I learned later that he arrived alive at the hospital but died during surgery. The wound had punctured his liver and caused severe internal hemorrhaging. The next day, when my parents arrived at the station, I was in a state of shock. I couldn't speak, couldn't cry. I just stared into the void, reliving those final moments repeatedly in my mind. It was during the investigation that everything came to light. The police found my grandfather's journal, the detailed entries of years of abuse, not just against me, but against other boys before me. They also found the photographs hidden in a false compartment at the bottom of the wardrobe. Irrefutable evidence of what he was, of what he had done. Medical examinations confirmed years of physical abuse on my body, marks, scars, evidence I didn't even know I carried. Still, I had taken a life. At 16, I was a killer. The judge took into consideration all the circumstances. The prosecution acknowledged legitimate self-defense, but argued that the use of industrial adhesive demonstrated premeditation. The defense argued prolonged trauma and a state of dissociation. In the end, I was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile rehabilitation center with mandatory psychological counseling. A light sentence, they said, considering the circumstances, but no sentence could be heavier than the one I already carried inside me. The first months in the rehabilitation center were the most difficult. I spent weeks practically in silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary. At night, the nightmares came without fail. Sometimes it was my grandfather chasing me through the corridors of the house. Other times it was me with bloody hands looking at a mirror and seeing his face reflected in place of mine. The center's psychologist, Dr. Martha, was tireless. At first, I refused to speak during the sessions. I would sit, staring at my own hands, reliving the moment they became covered in blood. She didn't pressure me, just said at the end of each fruitless session, "I'll be here when you're ready to talk, Ryan." It was only in the 3rd month that the words finally began to come out. A floodgate that, once opened, released a flood. I talked for hours, days, weeks about the years of abuse, about the constant fear, about the anger that grew inside me until it transformed into something unrecognizable, about that final night and the emptiness I felt afterward. "I should feel guilty for having killed someone," I said to her once. "Why don't I feel it?" "Prolonged trauma affects our ability to process emotions normally," she explained. "What you're feeling or not feeling is a protective response from your brain." During this period, my parents visited me religiously each week. My mother cried a lot in the first visits, repeating like a mantra, "We didn't know. How didn't we notice? How did we let this happen?" My father, on the other hand, carried a heavy silence, a guilt that seemed to crush him physically. He had trusted his own son to his father, who he now knew had also abused him in childhood, a secret he had carried for decades, convinced he was the only one that his father had changed. "I thought I had overcome it," he confessed to me in a visit when we were alone. "I thought they were just childhood nightmares. Something I made up." He always said I made up stories. That revelation explained so much about my father's emotional distance, his constant absence, the prolonged trips. He was running away, not just to work, but to keep away from that house, those memories. "I never imagined he would do the same to you," his voice broke. "Never. If I had known..." For the first time since I entered the center, I cried. Not for myself, but for my father, for that boy he once was, carrying the same burden I now carried. The other young people in the rehabilitation center treated me with a mixture of caution and respect. Most were there for crimes related to drugs or theft. A killer, even in self-defense, was something different. There was a boy, Matthew, who approached me after a few months. He was there for stabbing his stepfather, who beat his mother. "We're similar, you know," he told me one day while we shared a table during lunch. "We did what was necessary." It was the first friendship I formed in there. We weren't exactly close. Both of us carried walls too high around us to allow true intimacy, but there was a mutual understanding, a silent recognition of shared experiences. Group therapy was another challenge. Sitting in a circle with other young people and sharing personal stories seemed like a refined form of torture to me. In the first sessions, I just listened to stories of abandonment, of violence, of lives shattered in childhood. When I finally shared my story, a summarized version, without the darkest details, I realized I wasn't the only one carrying invisible scars. Each of those young people had their own version of hell. Each had found different ways to survive. At the end of my first year there, Dr. Martha suggested I start writing a journal, poems, stories, anything that would help externalize what I felt. I started with small notes, loose phrases, fragmented memories. With time, these notes transformed into entire pages. I wrote about the before, the during, and the after. About the house that was my prison for years, about how the smell of whiskey still makes me nauseous, about the guilt I don't feel for having taken a life, but that I feel for not having spoken earlier, for not having prevented other boys from going through the same. In my last month at the center, Dr. Martha gifted me with a book about trauma survivors. "You are not alone in this journey," she wrote on the first page, "and it doesn't end here." She was right. The journey didn't end when I left the center 6 months ago. It continues every day, in each nightmare, in each startle when someone touches my shoulder unexpectedly, in each relationship I'm afraid to form. I now live with my parents in a different city, where nobody knows our story. I'm finishing high school at a new school. I have a therapist I visit twice a week. I'm trying day by day to rebuild some kind of normalcy. Sometimes, when I'm sitting alone, like now in this empty park, I wonder who I would have become if none of that had happened. What kind of person I would be if I hadn't spent years in the dark, if I hadn't had blood on my hands before I could even drive. Other times, I wonder about the other boys, those who came before me, mentioned in the journal. Where are they? How did they survive? Do they carry the same scars I do? The police investigation located some of them, adults now, with their own families, their own secrets. Some denied everything, unable to face the truth. Others confirmed in testimonies that corroborated mine. One of them had committed suicide years before, leaving a letter that never mentioned my grandfather by name, but described in terrifying detail what he had suffered at the hands of someone who should have protected him. I don't know if I'll ever be truly normal. I don't know if the memories will ever completely disappear or if the nightmares will one day cease. But I know I survived. I know that, despite everything that was taken from me, I'm still here. My mom says I'm strong. My dad says I'm brave. My therapist says I'm resilient. I don't know what I am. I only know I'm still trying to figure it out. If you've made it this far and understood what I went through, if my story touched something inside you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss other stories like mine. And if it's not too much to ask, comment what time it is now while you're watching this. It might seem strange, but it helps me remember there's a real world out there, with real people living their lives at different times of the day. It helps me feel connected, even if from afar, even if through a screen. I don't know if I did the right thing that night. I don't know if there was another way out. I only know that in that moment, with that industrial adhesive in my hands, I chose to survive. And every day since then has been a continuous choice to keep surviving, to try to find something beyond survival. Maybe one day I will. Maybe one day survival will transform into real life. Until then, I keep walking. One step at a time. One day at a time. One breath at a time. This is my story. It isn't pretty. It doesn't have a happy ending, at least not yet. But it's true. And sometimes truth is all we have left when everything else is taken from us. This has been a Traumatic Accounts video. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from.